Maya Chen scheduled what she thought would be a routine consultation with a plastic surgeon, never knowing that the young doctor who would change her life forever was secretly testing whether anyone could see past his wealth to his wounded heart. Before I continue the story, please subscribe. I need to reach 1,000 subscribers so I can keep bringing you stories like this every day. It's just one click for you, but it means a lot to me. Thank you. Maya Chen's alarm pierced the pre-dawn darkness at 4:30 in the morning, just as it had every day for the past 8 months. She rolled out of her narrow bed in the studio apartment she shared with 2 roommates, her joints aching from another double shift at the diner. The mirror in their cramped bathroom reflected back a face she had grown to despise: plain brown eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses, a nose she considered too wide, cheekbones that seemed to disappear into her round cheeks. Maya traced the imaginary lines where a surgeon's knife might carve away her insecurities, transforming her into someone worthy of love, of confidence, of the life she dreamed about but never dared to reach for. Her fingers found the worn envelope tucked behind her alarm clock, thick with carefully counted bills and coins. $15,000. Every penny scraped together from her morning shift at the coffee shop, her afternoon hours cleaning office buildings, and her weekend nights waiting tables at the diner where drunk college students left dollar tips and cruel comments about her appearance. The consultation fee alone would cost her $300, money that represented 60 hours of scrubbing floors and serving coffee to people who looked right through her. But today was different. Today was the day she would finally take control of her destiny. Maya pulled on her only decent dress, a navy blue thrift store find that she had hemmed herself, and applied the minimal makeup she had taught herself from YouTube tutorials. Her hands trembled as she counted out the consultation fee one final time, knowing that this single appointment represented months of surviving on ramen noodles and walking miles to save bus fare. The plastic surgeon's office opened at 9, and she would be there, ready to begin the transformation that would finally make her visible in a world that had spent 23 years pretending she didn't exist. The gleaming glass facade of Beverly Hills Aesthetic Center rose before Maya, like a monument to perfection, its marble columns and crystal chandeliers visible even from the street. She clutched her worn purse tighter, feeling the weight of every passing luxury car and perfectly sculpted pedestrian who belonged in this world of wealth and beauty. The receptionist's smile seemed painted on as Maya approached the mahogany desk, her voice catching as she whispered her appointment details, while women with designer handbags and flawless faces glided past her toward private consultation rooms. Maya's second-hand dress suddenly felt shabby against the pristine white leather furniture, and she found herself hunching her shoulders, trying to disappear into the chair where she waited with sweaty palms and a racing heart. When her name was finally called, she followed a nurse down a hallway lined with before and after photos of transformed faces, each one a testament to the magic that money could buy. The door opened to reveal not the silver-haired distinguished surgeon she had imagined, but a man who couldn't be much older than herself, with kind eyes and an easy smile that seemed genuinely warm rather than professionally polished. Alexander Reed wore simple scrubs instead of an expensive suit, his dark hair slightly tousled as if he had been running his hands through it. And when he shook her hand, his grip was firm but gentle, lacking the practiced superiority she had expected from someone who held the power to remake faces and lives. He gestured for her to sit not on an examination table but in a comfortable chair across from his desk, and his voice carried none of the clinical detachment she had braced herself for when he asked not about her flaws but about her story, as if he actually cared about the person behind the insecurities that had brought her to his door. Dr. Reed leaned back in his chair as Maya spoke, her voice barely above a whisper, as she explained her desire for a simple rhinoplasty, maybe some work on her cheekbones. Nothing dramatic or expensive because this was all she could afford. He had heard variations of this conversation thousands of times, but something about Maya's hesitant delivery struck him as profoundly different from his usual clientele, who swept in demanding multiple procedures with the casual confidence of people accustomed to buying whatever they desired. She kept apologizing for taking up his time, for not being able to afford more comprehensive work, for even being there at all, as if seeking help with her appearance was somehow shameful, rather than the routine business that paid for his penthouse and luxury cars. When he asked what specifically bothered her about her features, Maya's response was heartbreakingly modest. She didn't want to look like a supermodel or completely transform her face. She just wanted to feel normal, to walk into a room without immediately cataloging every person who was prettier than her, to maybe have someone notice her for once in a way that wasn't pitying or dismissive. Alex found himself studying not her supposed flaws but the gentle way she gestured when she talked, the intelligence that sparkled in her eyes when she forgot to be self-conscious, the genuine sweetness that radiated from someone who had clearly spent years believing she was inadequate. His usual patience demanded perfection, complained about microscopic imperfections, and treated him like a sculptor, reshaping marble rather than a doctor working with human faces that held stories and emotions and irreplaceable character. Maya's hands shook as she opened her envelope of carefully saved money, counting out bills with the reverence of someone who understood the true cost of every dollar. And Alex realized he was witnessing something he had almost forgotten existed in his world of wealth and vanity, authentic vulnerability from someone who simply wanted to feel worthy of love. As Maya continued speaking, Alex felt the familiar weight of his hidden identity pressing against his chest like a stone, the secret that separated him from every genuine interaction he had ever attempted to build. Alexander Reed was not just another plastic surgeon in Beverly Hills, he was the sole heir to Reed Medical Corporation, a healthcare empire worth $800 million that his grandfather had built from a single clinic, and his father had expanded into a network of hospitals spanning 3 states. Every day Alex walked into this office that his trust fund had purchased, performing surgeries with skills he had earned through years of grueling medical training, yet knowing that most people saw only the family name and the inheritance that awaited him. He had chosen plastic surgery not because it was lucrative, but because it was the one field where his father's influence couldn't guarantee his success. Every procedure required steady hands and artistic vision that no amount of money could purchase. Every patient's satisfaction depended on his talent rather than his bank account. But the loneliness of his position had carved a hollow space in his chest that grew wider with each passing year, surrounded by colleagues who deferred to his family's power, friends who wanted access to his wealth, and romantic partners who saw him as a prize to be won rather than a person to be understood. His penthouse apartment overlooked the city like a beautiful prison, filled with expensive art and luxury furnishings that felt as cold and impersonal as museum displays, while his phone remained silent except for business calls and invitations to charity galas where he was expected to smile and write checks, but never truly connect with another human soul. Sitting across from Maya, watching her count out bills that represented months of sacrifice, Alex felt something he had almost forgotten. Existed the possibility of being seen for who he was rather than what he owned, the hope that someone might value his character over his inheritance. Maya's voice grew steadier as Dr. Reed's patient attention gave her courage to share the painful truths she had never spoken aloud, how she had spent her entire life feeling invisible in a world that seemed designed for beautiful people, how she watched other women receive smiles and compliments and opportunities that never came her way, how she had convinced herself that changing her appearance was the only path to the confidence and connection she desperately craved. She told him about the job interviews where she watched prettier candidates get hired despite her superior qualifications, about the college parties where she stood in corners watching others dance and laugh and fall in love while she remained unnoticed, about the mirror that had become her enemy, reflecting back a face she believed was fundamentally flawed and unworthy of affection. Her words spilled out like water from a broken dam, years of accumulated hurt and self-doubt flowing freely, as she described saving every dollar for this consultation, skipping meals and walking miles in worn-out shoes because she believed that fixing her nose and reshaping her cheekbones would somehow repair the broken parts of her spirit that whispered cruel lies about her worth. Alex found himself leaning forward, genuinely moved by her story in a way that had nothing to do with professional obligation, feeling an unfamiliar ache in his chest as he recognized the profound loneliness that echoed his own, though hers stemmed from feeling inadequate, while his came from being valued only for his wealth. He wanted to tell her that she was wrong about her appearance, that her gentle nature and genuine heart made her more beautiful than any of the surgically enhanced women who filled his appointment book, but he knew such words from a stranger would sound hollow and patronizing. Instead, he found himself asking questions about her dreams, her interests, her life beyond the insecurities that had brought her to his office, genuinely curious about this woman who had managed to maintain such sweetness despite years of feeling unseen and unvalued. Alex set down his consultation notes and looked directly into Maya's eyes, his voice carrying a sincerity that surprised even him as he told her something he had never said to a paying patient: that she didn't need surgery, that her features were naturally harmonious and lovely, that the changes she was requesting would diminish rather than enhance the gentle beauty that radiated from her authentic spirit. He explained how her nose perfectly complemented her face shape, how her cheekbones gave her an elegant structure that many of his patients paid thousands to achieve artificially, how the very features she considered flaws were actually the elements that made her face memorable and distinctly hers. Maya's cheeks flushed as she listened, her hands fidgeting with the envelope of money in her lap. And Alex could see the disbelief flickering across her expression like shadows, the years of negative self-talk too deeply ingrained to be erased by a few kind words from a stranger. She smiled politely and thanked him for his reassurance, but her tone carried the resigned patience of someone accustomed to empty compliments, the protective skepticism of a woman who had learned not to trust praise that felt too generous to be genuine. In her mind, Dr. Reed was simply being professional and compassionate, perhaps trying to spare her feelings or manage her expectations about what surgery could realistically accomplish, because surely a successful doctor who saw beautiful patients every day wouldn't waste time offering false hope to someone like her. She appreciated his kindness, but kindness wasn't the same as truth, and the truth was that she had spent 23 years being ordinary at best, invisible at worst, and no amount of gentle reassurance could change the fact that she needed help becoming the kind of woman who deserved to be noticed, valued, and loved. Alex watched the doubt settle back over her features like a veil, recognizing the familiar armor of someone who had learned to protect themselves from disappointment by refusing to believe in possibilities that seemed too good to be true. Maya gathered her envelope of money with quiet dignity, thanking Dr. Reed for his time and asking if she could schedule the procedure for the following month, once she had saved a bit more for the additional fees. Her voice steady despite the disappointment that flickered across her features when he gently suggested she take more time to consider whether surgery was truly what she wanted. She shook his hand with the same genuine warmth she had shown when arriving, her touch lingering just a moment longer than professional courtesy required, and Alex felt an unexpected reluctance to let her walk out of his office and disappear back into the city where she would continue believing herself unworthy of the love and admiration she so clearly deserved. As the door closed behind her, Alex found himself staring at the empty chair where she had sat, replaying their conversation with an intensity that puzzled him, remembering the way she had asked about his background, not to assess his credentials or wealth, but out of genuine curiosity about his life, the way she had listened to his responses as if his words mattered beyond their professional relevance. For the first time in years, someone had treated him simply as a person, rather than as Dr. Reed the heir, Dr. Reed the eligible bachelor, or Dr. Reed the surgeon who could grant wishes with his scalpel. Maya had looked at him and seen only a young man who seemed kind and approachable, asking about his medical school experience and whether he enjoyed his work because she was interested in him as a human being, not because she wanted to network or impress or manipulate him for some hidden agenda. The afternoon appointments blurred together as Alex's mind wandered back to Maya's gentle laugh, her thoughtful questions, her complete lack of pretense or calculation, and he realized that in a single consultation, this shy woman who considered herself forgettable had managed to accomplish something that socialites and models and heiresses had failed to do. She had made him feel genuinely seen and appreciated for who he was, rather than what he possessed. 3 days passed before Alex finally surrendered to the pull he felt toward Maya. Sitting in his office after his last patient had left, staring at her contact information in his appointment system while wrestling with a decision that violated every professional boundary he had maintained throughout his career. He had never called a patient for a personal follow-up, never allowed himself to blur the lines between his medical practice and his private life, yet something about Maya's genuine spirit had lodged itself in his thoughts, like a splinter that grew more painful with each passing hour. His fingers hovered over his phone as he crafted and discarded a dozen different explanations for why he might legitimately need to contact her, concerns about her psychological readiness for surgery, questions about her medical history, routine follow-up protocols that didn't actually exist, but each excuse felt hollow and manipulative, unworthy of the honest connection they had shared during her consultation. Finally, Alex abandoned all pretense and dialed her number, his heart racing like a teenager asking someone to prom, knowing that this single phone call would cross a line he had never even considered crossing before. Maya's voice sounded surprised and slightly worried when she answered, immediately asking if something was wrong with her consultation or if there were additional fees she needed to prepare for. Her concern so genuine and selfless that Alex felt a sharp pang of guilt for making her anxious. He found himself stumbling over his words as he explained that he had been thinking about their conversation, that he wanted to make sure she was taking time to truly consider her decision, that perhaps they could meet somewhere outside the clinical setting to discuss her concerns more thoroughly. Words that sounded reasonable on the surface but carried an undercurrent of personal interest that made his palms sweat. Maya's long pause on the other end of the line stretched into eternity before she quietly agreed to meet him for coffee, her voice carrying a mixture of confusion and cautious hope that matched the conflicted emotions churning in Alex's chest as he realized he had just taken the first step towards something that could change both of their lives forever. The small coffee shop Maya had suggested was a world away from the upscale establishments Alex usually frequented. With mismatched furniture, local artwork covering every wall, and the comfortable chaos of a place where students and artists gathered to work and dream rather than conduct business deals or impress potential clients, Alex arrived first, choosing a corner table where they could speak privately, his usual confidence replaced by an unfamiliar nervousness that made him question every decision from his choice of casual clothes to the way he had styled his hair, wondering if Maya would think he was trying too hard to appear approachable or not, hard enough to show he took their meeting seriously. When Maya walked through the door, her cheeks flushed from the cool evening air and her hair slightly disheveled from the wind, Alex felt his breath catch in his throat as he saw her not through the clinical lens of a consultation room, but as a beautiful woman moving through the world with unconscious grace. She spotted him immediately and offered a tentative smile that transformed her entire face, making Alex understand for the first time why people spoke of inner beauty radiating outward. And when she approached their table, he stood to greet her with an awkwardness that felt both mortifying and endearing. Their conversation began stilted and formal, Maya thanking him again for his time while Alex insisted it was no trouble at all, both of them dancing around the obvious question of why a successful surgeon would invite a potential patient for coffee to discuss concerns that could have been addressed over the phone. But as Maya relaxed into her chair, wrapping her hands around her coffee mug like a shield against her nervousness, their words began to flow more naturally, touching on her work at the diner, his experiences in medical school, their shared love of old movies and quiet bookstores, creating an intimacy that had nothing to do with medical procedures and everything to felt more like a perfect first date than a medical consultation. But the message that appeared on her screen made her stumble to a halt on the busy sidewalk. Her roommate had sent a link to a gossip website with the caption, "OMG, isn't this your doctor?" And when Maya clicked the link, her heart dropped into her stomach as she stared at a photograph of Alex leaving an upscale restaurant, his arm around a stunning blonde woman, with a headline that read, "Reed Medical Heir Alexander Reed Spotted with Mystery Socialite." The article described him as one of the city's most eligible bachelors, heir to an $800 million medical empire, known for his charitable donations and his family's influence in healthcare politics, a man whose trust fund alone was worth more than most people would earn in 10 lifetimes. Maya read the words over and over, each sentence feeling like a physical blow, as she realized that the kind, down-to-earth doctor who had listened to her insecurities with such genuine attention was actually one of the wealthiest men in the state, someone who moved in circles so far above her own that their worlds should never have intersected except in the sterile context of a doctor-patient relationship. The photographs showed Alex at charity galas, medical conferences, and exclusive parties, always impeccably dressed and surrounded by the kind of beautiful, accomplished people who belonged in his rarefied world. And Maya felt a crushing wave of humiliation as she understood how naive she had been to believe that his interest in her could be anything more than professional courtesy or perhaps pity for a struggling girl who had saved up her pennies for surgery. She scrolled through more images, each one reinforcing the vast gulf between their realities, until she came to a photo of the Reed family mansion, a sprawling estate that could have housed 100 families like hers, and Maya finally understood why Dr. Alexander Reed had seemed too good to be true, because he was. And she had been fooling herself to think that someone like him could ever see someone like her as anything more than another charity case. Maya's hands shook as she stared at her phone screen, the revelation hitting her like ice water flooding her veins. And she felt the familiar sting of humiliation that had followed her throughout her life, but this time magnified by the cruel understanding that she had actually begun to believe someone might genuinely care about her. The coffee they had shared, the easy laughter, the way Alex had looked into her eyes as if she were the most interesting person in the world. It all felt tainted now, recontextualized as either a wealthy man's amusement or worse, his pity for a pathetic girl who had scraped together every dollar for a consultation she could barely afford. Maya's mind raced through their conversation, searching for clues she should have noticed, red flags that would have revealed his true identity. But Alex had given no indication of his wealth, wearing simple scrubs and casual clothes, speaking to her with none of the condescension she would have expected from someone born into such privilege. That made his deception feel even more cruel somehow, as if he had been conducting some kind of social experiment, observing how an ordinary person would react to kindness from someone they believed to be their equal, perhaps gathering material for cocktail party stories about the amusing little working girl who had saved her tips for plastic surgery. She thought about the way she had opened her heart to him, sharing her deepest insecurities and dreams with embarrassing honesty, while he had withheld the most basic truth about himself. And Maya felt a surge of anger mixed with devastating shame that made her want to disappear from the world entirely. When her phone rang with Alex's number, she stared at it through tears of rage and disappointment, knowing that whatever explanation he might offer would only confirm what she now understood with painful clarity, that someone like Alexander Reed, heir to millions, could never genuinely care about someone like Maya Chen, a nobody who cleaned office buildings and served coffee to people who looked right through her. And any attention he had shown her could only be motivated by boredom, curiosity, or the kind of charitable impulse that wealthy people cultivated to make themselves feel better about their privilege. Alex tried calling Maya 17 times over the next 2 days, each unanswered ring echoing in his chest like a physical pain, until he finally drove to the diner where she worked, arriving during the dinner rush to find her moving between tables with mechanical efficiency, her usual warmth replaced by the distant professionalism of someone who had retreated behind emotional walls. She spotted him immediately but turned away, her shoulders tensing as she continued taking orders and refilling coffee cups, and when he approached her station, she spoke to him with the cold politeness reserved for unwelcome customers, asking if he needed a table while refusing to meet his eyes. Alex felt the familiar sting of being judged by his family name and wealth rather than his character. But this time the rejection cut deeper, because it came from the one person who had seen him simply as Alex, not as the Reed heir, and he realized that his failure to reveal his identity had cost him the most genuine connection he had ever experienced. He waited until her shift ended, following her to the parking lot despite her obvious attempts to avoid him, and when she finally turned to face him, her eyes blazing with hurt and anger, he felt the words tumble out in a desperate rush of honesty about the loneliness that had defined his adult life, surrounded by people who wanted his money or his status but never him. He told her about the exhaustion of never knowing if someone's kindness was genuine or calculated, about the isolation of wealth that turned every interaction into a potential transaction, about how refreshing and miraculous it had felt to sit across from someone who asked about his dreams and opinions because she was interested in him as a person. Maya's expression softened slightly as he spoke, but the hurt in her eyes remained sharp and unforgiving. And Alex felt himself pleading with her to understand that his deception hadn't been malicious but protective, a desperate attempt to experience authentic human connection in a world where his bank account had become the most interesting thing about him to everyone he met. Maya listened to Alex's words with her arms crossed defensively across her chest, feeling her heart betray her by responding to the genuine pain in his voice, even as her mind catalogued all the reasons why his explanation changed nothing about the fundamental impossibility of whatever was growing between them. She wanted to believe him, wanted to accept that his loneliness was real and that his interest in her was authentic. But the evidence of their incompatible worlds felt overwhelming. He lived in a penthouse while she shared a studio apartment with 2 roommates. He drove luxury cars while she took 3 buses to get anywhere. He attended charity galas while she worked double shifts just to pay rent. Even if his feelings were genuine now, Maya couldn't shake the certainty that the novelty of her ordinariness would eventually wear off, that he would grow tired of explaining her presence to his wealthy friends, that the reality of dating someone from her background would become an embarrassment he could no longer tolerate. She had seen enough movies and read enough stories to know how these fairy tale romances ended in real life. The rich man always returned to his own kind, leaving the working girl with nothing but memories and a broken heart that no amount of money could repair. Yet despite her rational fears, Maya could feel herself falling for Alex with an intensity that terrified her. Drawn not just to his kindness but to the vulnerability he had shown her, the way his confident facade cracked to reveal someone as lonely and searching as herself, someone who understood what it felt like to be valued for the wrong reasons and dismissed for circumstances beyond their control. Standing in the parking lot under the harsh fluorescent lights, watching Alex's face as he waited for her response, Maya felt torn between the part of her that wanted to run before she got hurt worse, and the part that whispered maybe, just maybe, love could bridge the gap between their worlds. Even as her practical mind screamed that such dreams only led to heartbreak for girls like her who dared to reach above their station. Maya's world collapsed at 3 a.m. when her mother's sobbing phone call woke her from restless sleep, the words heart attack and intensive care cutting through her grogginess like knives, and by the time she reached the hospital, her father was connected to machines that beeped ominously while doctors spoke in hushed tones about emergency surgery, blocked arteries, and treatment options that carried price tags Maya couldn't begin to comprehend. Her mother clutched Maya's hand in the sterile waiting room, whispering prayers in their native language, while Maya tried to process the insurance representative's explanation that their basic coverage would handle only a fraction of the specialized cardiac procedure her father desperately needed, leaving them responsible for nearly $60,000 in medical bills that might as well have been $60 million for all the hope Maya had of paying them. The surgeon, a kind but businesslike man in his 50s, explained that while the hospital would perform emergency stabilization regardless of their ability to pay, the advanced intervention her father needed to prevent future attacks required payment arrangements or transfer to a county facility where he would join a waiting list that could stretch for months, time her father might not have given the severity of his condition. Maya sat in the harsh fluorescent lighting, calculating frantically in her head, adding up her savings account, her roommate's possible loans, the money she had earmarked for her surgery consultation, every dollar she could possibly scrape together, only to realize that her entire financial existence was a rounding error compared to what her father's life would cost. She thought of Alex's world of charity galas and trust funds, of casual dinner bills that exceeded her monthly salary, of a system where money determined who lived and who died, and felt a rage so pure and helpless it took her breath away, knowing that somewhere across the city, people were spending more on a single piece of jewelry than her family needed to save the man who had worked 2 jobs his entire adult life and never asked for anything more than the chance to provide for his family. Alex discovered Maya's crisis through a chance encounter at the hospital where he occasionally consulted, spotting her hunched figure in the cardiac waiting room at 2 in the afternoon when she should have been at work, her face streaked with tears and exhaustion as she filled out endless insurance forms with shaking hands. He approached cautiously, his heart breaking as Maya looked up with red-rimmed eyes and explained her father's condition in a voice hollow with desperation, and Alex felt the full weight of his privilege crash down on him as he realized that the amount needed for her father's surgery was less than he typically spent on a weekend vacation, a sum so insignificant to his wealth that he could write the check without affecting his lifestyle in any measurable way. Every instinct screamed at him to solve this immediately, to call the hospital's billing department and arrange for the procedure to be covered by an anonymous donation, to use his family's medical connections to ensure her father received the best possible care. But Alex knew Maya well enough to understand that such direct intervention would destroy whatever fragile trust remained between them, confirming her worst fears that he saw her as a charity case rather than an equal worthy of love and respect. He watched her struggle with forms and calculations, her proud shoulders bent under the weight of an impossible burden, and felt the cruel irony of possessing the exact solution to her problem while being unable to offer it without losing her forever. Trapped by the same wealth that could save her father's life, but would simultaneously prove that the gulf between their worlds was too vast to bridge, Alex excused himself and spent the next hour pacing the hospital corridors, his mind racing through possibilities and strategies, desperate to find a way to help that wouldn't wound Maya's dignity or confirm her belief that their connection was based on his pity rather than genuine affection. Knowing that the woman he was falling in love with would rather watch her father suffer than accept what she would perceive as condescending charity from a man whose trust fund could solve her family's crisis with pocket change. Alex worked through the night with his family's foundation attorney, hastily establishing the Chen Family Medical Scholarship through a series of shell corporations and anonymous trusts that would make the funding untraceable back to him, crafting elaborate paperwork that described a new program designed to help families facing cardiac emergencies, complete with fake selection committees and fabricated application processes that Maya's family had supposedly won through a random lottery system. The next morning, a hospital administrator approached Maya's mother with the incredible news that their family had been selected as the inaugural recipient of a generous medical scholarship that would cover the entire cost of her father's surgery, plus additional support for recovery expenses, presenting official-looking documents that described the benefactor as a group of anonymous donors committed to helping working families navigate medical crises. Maya felt overwhelming relief flood through her exhausted body as she watched her father being prepped for the life-saving procedure, tears of gratitude streaming down her face as she whispered prayers of thanksgiving for this miraculous intervention that had appeared just when hope seemed lost. But something nagged at the back of her mind about the timing and specifics of this supposedly random selection. Her suspicions crystallized 3 days later when she overheard two nurses discussing how unusual it was for a brand-new scholarship program to appear overnight, with funding specifically tailored to cardiac procedures. And when Maya pressed the hospital administrator for more details about the selection process, his evasive answers and nervous demeanor confirmed what she was beginning to suspect. A few phone calls to the foundation office revealed the truth that Alex had tried so desperately to conceal the medical scholarship was less than a week old. Established with a massive donation from an anonymous benefactor whose legal representatives had specifically requested information about the Chen family's situation, and Maya felt her heart shatter as she realized that Alex had essentially bought her father's life, turning their family's crisis into another example of how his wealth could solve problems that destroyed ordinary people. Maya confronted Alex in his office the next evening, her eyes blazing with a fury that made him step back as she slammed the scholarship documents onto his desk and accused him of treating her family like a pet project, her voice shaking with rage as she demanded to know how he could be so arrogant as to think he could buy his way into her life, manipulating her emotions and her family's crisis to play out some wealthy man's fantasy of rescuing the poor girl who had captured his interest. Alex tried to explain that he had only wanted to help, that watching her suffer while possessing the means to end that suffering had been torture. But Maya cut him off with words that sliced through his heart like surgical blades, telling him that he had stolen her agency, her right to face her problems with dignity, reducing her to a charity case whose gratitude he could collect like some kind of trophy. She accused him of being no different from every other rich person who thought money could solve everything, who believed that throwing cash at a problem absolved them of any need to truly understand or respect the people they claimed to care about. And Alex felt his own anger rising as he realized she was determined to see his gesture as manipulation rather than love. He found himself shouting that money meant nothing to him compared to her happiness, that he would give up every dollar of his inheritance if it meant she would stop looking at him like he was the enemy, that the wealth she kept throwing in his face was actually a prison that had kept him isolated and lonely until she had shown him what genuine connection felt like. Maya's eyes filled with tears as she told him that was exactly the problem. He could say money didn't matter because he had never lived without it, never faced the terror of watching someone you love slip away because you couldn't afford to save them, never understood that pride and self-sufficiency weren't luxuries but survival mechanisms for people who had learned that accepting help from the wealthy always came with strings attached. The space between them felt like an ocean as they stood in his elegant office, both of them crying now, both desperate to bridge a gap that seemed to widen with every word they spoke, until Maya whispered that she couldn't be with someone who would always see her as a problem to be solved rather than a person to be loved. Maya turned to leave Alex's office, her hand on the door handle, but something in his broken voice when he whispered, "Please don't go," made her pause, and when she looked back, She saw not the confident surgeon or the wealthy heir, but simply a man whose pain mirrored her own, his shoulders shaking as he confessed that he had never experienced genuine affection from anyone who didn't want something from him, that every relationship in his life had been transactional, until she had asked about his dreams over coffee and listened to his answers as if they mattered. The raw vulnerability in his voice stripped away her anger like layers of old paint. Revealing the truth, she had been too hurt and proud to acknowledge that Alex's loneliness was as deep and isolating as her own insecurity, that they were both prisoners of circumstances beyond their control, both searching desperately for someone who would see past the surface to the person underneath. She realized that while she had spent years feeling invisible because of her appearance and social status, Alex had spent just as long feeling reduced to his bank account and family name, both of them starving for authentic connection in a world that seemed determined to keep them trapped in roles they never chose. Maya felt her heart crack open as she understood that his clumsy attempt to help her father hadn't been about control or condescension, but about love, expressed in the only language he knew, the language of someone who had been taught that money was how you showed you cared, how you proved your worth, how you earned the right to be valued. She saw the irony in their situation with painful clarity. She had rejected him for having too much while he had been rejected by others for not being enough beyond his wealth, both of them wounded by a society that measured human worth in dollars and appearances rather than kindness and character. Standing in his office, watching tears stream down his face as he waited for her to walk away forever, Maya realized that they weren't separated by their differences but united by their shared hunger for someone who would love them not despite their circumstances but because of who they truly were, underneath all the labels the world had placed upon them. Maya crossed the room slowly, her anger dissolving into understanding as she reached out to touch Alex's face, her fingers tracing the tears she had caused, and when she spoke, her voice carried the gentle strength of someone who had found clarity in the midst of chaos, telling him that she finally understood they were both just scared, broken people who had found something precious in each other that was worth fighting for despite the obstacles their different worlds presented. She admitted that she had been so focused on protecting herself from potential heartbreak that she had almost thrown away the first real love she had ever experienced, and Alex pulled her into his arms with desperate gratitude, holding her as if she might disappear if he let go, both of them crying and laughing as they realized that love didn't care about bank accounts or social status, that genuine connection transcended the artificial barriers society had built between people. In the weeks that followed, Alex made a decision that shocked his family and friends but felt perfectly right to him. He established the Maya Chen Foundation for Medical Equity, donating $50 million of his inheritance to create a permanent endowment that would help working families afford life-saving medical procedures, and he invited Maya to serve as the foundation's executive director, recognizing that her lived experience with healthcare poverty made her uniquely qualified to ensure the money reached the people who needed it most. The foundation's first board meeting took place in the same coffee shop where they had shared their first real conversation, surrounded by the mismatched furniture and local artwork that had witnessed their tentative beginning. And as Maya presented her plans for expanding access to cardiac care, Alex watched her with wonder, seeing how her passion and intelligence transformed her into the confident, radiant woman she had always been underneath her self-doubt. Their love story became the foundation's origin story, proof that when two people truly see and value each other, they can create something beautiful that extends far beyond their individual happiness, touching the lives of countless families who would never know that their second chances at life began with a shy girl who saved her pennies for surgery, and a lonely millionaire who learned that real wealth comes from giving your heart to someone who treasures it not for what it can buy but for what it offers freely. 6 months later, Maya stood before the bathroom mirror in the apartment she now shared with Alex. But instead of cataloging her supposed flaws, she saw a woman transformed, not by surgery but by love and purpose. Her eyes bright with confidence earned through meaningful work, her smile radiant with the knowledge that she was valued for her mind, her heart, and her unwavering commitment to helping families navigate the healthcare system that had once seemed so insurmountable to her own. The Maya Chen Foundation had already helped over 200 families afford critical medical procedures, and Maya had discovered talents she never knew she possessed: grant writing, public speaking, strategic planning skills that bloomed under Alex's encouragement and the foundation board's respect for her unique perspective on healthcare inequality. Alex had found his own transformation, trading the isolation of inherited wealth for the deep satisfaction of earned purpose, working alongside Maya to build something meaningful while falling more deeply in love with her passionate dedication to their shared mission. Their relationship had weathered the scrutiny of society pages and family disapproval, emerging stronger because it was built on genuine partnership rather than fairy tale fantasy. Both of them having learned that true compatibility came not from matching bank accounts, but from aligned values and complementary strengths. Maya no longer saw Alex as a wealthy savior but as her equal partner in love and work, while Alex had stopped viewing Maya through the lens of her humble origins, and instead saw her as the brilliant, compassionate woman who had taught him that real success was measured not in dollars accumulated but in lives improved. As Maya prepared for another day of site visits to hospitals and meetings with medical administrators, she caught Alex's reflection in the mirror as he adjusted his tie behind her, and they shared a smile that held the quiet contentment of two people who had found not just love but purpose, proving that the most beautiful transformations happen not on operating tables but in hearts that learn to see themselves and others through the eyes of unconditional acceptance, and that true worth was never about changing who you are but about finding someone who helps you become the best version of yourself you were always meant to be.